Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with Game 3 of the 2018 World Championship match between world champion Magnus Carlsen and his challenger Fabiano Caruana. Caruana was white in Game 3 and here we see the handshake before the game. Let's get straight into it. It was played on Monday the 12th of November and Caruana opened with e4 like he did in Game 1, c5, the Sicilian again, also as in Game 1. Knight f3, knight c6, and we again see the Rossolimo. g6, bishop takes, d takes, d3, bishop g7, and here Caruana deviates from the first game by castling. It's still possible to come back into Game 1 through a move transposition. This is move 6 in Game 1. Caruana castled on move 9. He played h3 in Game 1 instead of castling. After castling, Carlsen played queen c7, and now we are really in a new game. The question was who would blink first, and it is Carlsen. He puts in the first real new move. Grandmaster Peter Svidler said he was confused about this move. He said it's a waiting move, but normally when you want to make a waiting move in this position you play b6. But Carlsen played queen c7. He did not comment on this move in the press conference after the game. Caruana did comment. He said he had not seen queen c7 before and that he played rook e1 on move 7 because he thought it was a logical move. In Game 1 we saw white very quickly playing f2, f4, and with a rook on e1 that is now a lot less likely. Carlsen pushed in the center, a3, knight f6 and b4. Caruana plays on the queen side. Carlsen castled, and now the question was, can white take that pawn? Can he take on c5? White is a pawn up, but black has full compensation for the pawn was a general view of the grandmasters I've seen analyze and comment on this move. Black has better development. Knight d7 was Peter Svidler's idea here, and if you then protect the pawn with bishop e3, then f5, starting a kingside attack with full compensation for black. Caruana did not like grabbing the pawn either, and he made a developing move, knight bd2. Bishop g4 from Carlsen, and again you can take on c5. It was Grandmaster Nigel Short who was surprised Caruana did not go for the pawn at this moment, and then tried to hang on to it, but he did not give any variations. Caruana did not want to do that. He played h3, and Carlsen took on f3. Here queen takes f3 was expected by Grandmaster Svidler, explaining that the conversation is very much centered around forcing black to take on b4. This move. So keeping the option knight b3 alive, this move, putting the pressure on the pawn on c5, which would then force black to take on b4. That's a good option for white, as Svidler explained. That's why he thought Caruana would take with the queen. But Caruana thought differently and took with the knight, with other ideas in mind. And maybe he was right because Carlsen felt he had now to take on b4. A takes b4 and a5, and as Svidler explained, black will only take on b4 if he can follow it up immediately with a5, resolving the problem of the weak pawn on a7 with a half open file for white. But Carlsen said after the game that he was not happy with the outcome of the opening. He did not indicate where he went wrong. Maybe it was at this moment, maybe c takes b4 and then a5 was not the way to go. Future analysis will have to point that out. Caruana took on a5, white cannot really allow black to push a5, a4 and get a passed pawn. Carlsen took back, and here is a very important moment in Game 3. What Caruana wanted to play was rook takes a5, then queen takes, then bishop d2 hitting the queen, queen back to c7 and then queen a1. Attacking the e5 pawn, knight d7 to protect the pawn, and then rook b1. Svidler said, and only now do you realize how uncomfortable black's position is. Queen a7 is an idea, and also queen a2 and knight g5. Attacking the pawn on f7. The bishop on g7 really wants to be anywhere else. It's not easy to win for white, but he is having all the fun, said Svidler. And Alexander Grishuk said this is a sad position for black. And both players agreed, as was clear from the press conference after the game. So this starts with rook takes a5. Caruana wanted to play it, but then thought, why do I not play bishop d2 first and get the same position? After rook takes a1, Queen takes a1. But of course you don't have to take on a1, and Carlsen retreated the rook to a8, not giving Caruana all the fun, not giving him the a-file. And here the position is equal. Queen b1, Svidler said it feels like the queen belongs somewhere on the b-file. Alexander Grishuk said, I'm getting a vibe that Carlsen will defend this position effortlessly. He played knight d7, and there was a question from the audience, will we see black push f5? And both Svidler and Grishuk simultaneously said no, and Svidler explained that black really needs to have his light squared bishop to play this way. Judith Polgar explained here that black has ideas of knight c5 to e6 and b7 b5, and Svidler explained that if white will build up on the e5 pawn with queen b2 and bishop c3 attacking that pawn, then black will play rook e8, bishop f8, 2d6, f6 and king g7 just to show a defensive scheme for black. Very interesting, as always, to hear these top grandmasters explain these positions. It all seems so logical when they explain it. After knight d7, queen b4 was played by Caruana, rook f2 e8, bishop c3 and b5. Caruana swapped a pair of rooks and played rook a1. Peter Svidler gave another nice variation with the queen infiltrating on e7, then bishop f6 hitting the queen, but there is a nice tactic, bishop takes e5. Beautiful tactic. You cannot take the bishop because then you will lose the knight, winning a pawn, and white also wins a pawn after bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes e5, queen takes d7, but black has compensation. He plays rook a1. We will very likely get a queen endgame, and I checked a number of variations with the engine, and black will win the queen back on c2. The black queen is very powerful in this position. Nice variation though. But after rook takes a8, Caruana chose rook a1 instead of infiltrating with his queen. Those rooks were swapped, and queen a7 from Carlsen. Bishop c3, queen a2, infiltrating with the queen, and now queen e7 is a tempting move. Svidler looked at a number of variations, but none of it seemed enough for white. White is attacking the knight on d7, but black will take on c2, counter-attacking the bishop, and Svidler's conclusion was that this is dangerous for white. Caruana did not go for it, he played queen b2. The queens were swapped, and f6. Svidler explained that black's only idea here is knight d2 to b3 to a5, but that black should be able to deal with that comfortably. For example, after knight d2, black can play knight c5, that would stop the idea of the white knight going to a5, bishop a3 and then bishop f8, and it's okay, there's not much going on, the position is equal. Caruana did not play knight d2, he played king f1. Both kings were played closer to the center, knight c5, bishop c3, knight e6, g3, bishop f8, and knight to d2. In this phase, Magnus Carlsen is slowly outplaying his opponent. Svidler and Grishuk looked at a piece sacrifice at this moment. Bishop takes e5 instead of knight d2, then f takes, knight takes, check, king e7, knight takes another pawn with check, and king d6. White has 3 pawns for the piece, and Svidler explained if you give white 3 moves here, he will play f4, c3 and d4 and then has chances to win. But as white cannot make 3 moves in a row, he's just asking for trouble with his piece sacrifice, said Grishuk. So bishop takes e5 did not come on the board. Knight d2 was played. Knight g5, nice move from Carlsen, attacking the h3 pawn and forcing that pawn up the board to a dark square. And that could be later in the endgame a problem for white, with black having the bishop of the dark squares. Knight back to h6 where it came from after having forced that pawn up the board to h4. Knight b3, h5, bishop d2, making the f4 push an option for white. Bishop d6, stopping that f4 push, controlling the f4 square with 3 pieces. Caruana played c3, controlling the d4 square, so now maybe d3, d4 is an option, and also the knight can now play. c5, stopping the push d3, d4. Black has succeeded to stop both the d4 and f4 pushes. Polgar explained that Black wants to play b4 himself to get rid of the c3 pawn, which would free up the d4 square for the knight to jump to. And she said White would love to get his knight to d5, but it will take a lot of time. For example, this is a route to that lovely square on d5, but indeed that is 4 moves. After the move from the game c5, Caruana played bishop e3, king e7, the king goes to the queen side, king d1, king d7, king c2, and f5. Caruana can only sit and wait. King d1, he was also getting low on time. This is move 37. He had to make 3 more moves before the time control. Carlsen still had about half an hour left on the clock, but here he played too quickly, forcing things, maybe with Caruana's time pressure in mind. He should have kept maneuvering for longer. He took on e4. Caruana took back and then he played c4. Knight back to d2 and knight c5. As Carlsen explained after the game, he wanted to give Caruana the choice on move 40 to take or not to take with little time on the clock. Caruana decided to take on c5, bishop takes, and king e2. Grandmaster Hjartarson from Iceland said White is very passive, Black can shuffle around and White can't do much. Also Judith Polgar said that this is a very unpleasant position for White, but as they looked at it for a few minutes they actually saw that the worst is over for White and that he actually has an equal position here. Carlsen had forced the play too much in the last few moves. He played king c6 and Caruana found a nice move, knight f1, with the idea of knight e3 and knight d5. And very important then, and that's what Caruana had to calculate here, that if Carlsen goes in the king and pawn endgame when the knight appears on e3 by chopping it off, then that king and pawn endgame is a draw. That is quite important. b4 from Carlsen, c takes, bishop takes, there comes the knight to e3, we're not getting a king and pawn endgame, king c5, f4, now White also gets a passed pawn, he has enough counterplay, e takes, g takes, bishop a5, f5 creating a passed pawn, g takes, and e takes f5 is more than enough for a draw. What's also important here is that this pawn will promote on a light square and the bishop is of the dark squares, so even if everything goes off the board apart from that pawn and that bishop, if the king reaches the corner then it's still a draw. But Caruana did not take on f5, he played another move that immediately draws, knight takes c4, a piece sacrifice, very nice, based on the fact that this pawn is promoting on a light square. King takes, e takes f5, and all that Black now has left is that bishop and that pawn. The White king will walk at his leisure to the corner and Black will not be able to force the king out of there and this game will be drawn. After e takes f5, no more moves were made. The players shook hands and after 49 moves this game was a draw. The moment of the handshake, that's a good firm handshake and confirmation that we have played 3 games that all have ended in a draw. The picture is from the press conference after game 3. Magnus Carlsen was asked, were you happy with the outcome of the opening? Nope, was the answer. He thought he was worse after the opening. But then I was gradually equalizing after my opponent missed a move. I was pressing, but I forced things too quickly when I exchanged the pawns and then the knights. It looked very tempting, but it was nothing. On move 40 I wanted to give him the choice in time trouble to take or not, but there was no real reason to provoke a crisis at that moment. Caruana said after queen c7 on move 6 I was on my own. I played rook e1 on move 7 because it looked logical. I had a very pleasant position, made a bad move, bishop d2, and it was completely equal. And I managed to turn it into a slightly worse position. After the time control it was a dead draw, before that I was slightly worried. In the ending I didn't really know what to do. It should be a draw no matter what, but Magnus could have tortured me more. Game 4 will be played on Tuesday the 13th of November and I will be here after the game to tell you what happened. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel and please leave a comment. If you like the video, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.